Once you've had a look at the erosion risk in the coastal area, the next thing that you need to do is to take a look at the factors that you need to take into consideration when making your decision. Remember, your decision will have to be justified, so you need to run it through this framework of these factors to make the decision. So let's have a look. The first factor that you need to look at here is the factor of CBA, which stands for cost benefit analysis. And the cost benefit analysis is looking here, first of all, at the economic benefits of the value of the land that you're protecting. So that's the infrastructure, the buildings, the roads, the railways, electricity supplies, all sorts of things like that. And then also the economic activities that are going on, because coastal areas have a lot of economic activities. The towns there will have economic activities to support their own population. But of course, coastal areas tend to be very popular for tourism. So you will have significant tourism infrastructure there that needs to be protected, but that also generates economic activity for the local area. These communities are very often dependent upon tourism as a significant proportion of their economy. So you need to take a look at the amount of money that that's bringing in, the benefits that'll have in terms of the employment for local people, and then just the money that is being spent in the local area as a result of that. So those are the economic benefits, and you need to weigh those up against costs, because if you are going to intervene with any kind of hard engineering strategy, which you might have to, because you might have these buildings that you want to protect really close to the coastline, the railway line might be right beside the sea. You might have, even though you would prefer in general to use soft engineering, you might have to use hard engineering. And of course, if you do, there's the cost of building it, but there's also the cost of maintaining it, because as you know, hard engineering tends to work or try to control the natural processes, and the natural processes tend to undermine and damage them. So you're weighing up those costs and you're weighing up the benefits, and it's simply an equation basically, that if the economic value outweighs the costs, then you're more likely to approve it. Conversely, if the costs are greater than the value of all the land being protected, as is the case in SMPs, you're less likely to approve it. So let's take a look at this particular example here. It's a photograph of a coastal area in England. And the question I've got here is, why was this seawall built here? And then why is it being repaired? Now, in your decision-making exercise, the resources you will be given will include text, but they will also include photographs like this, and you will be expected to make use of these photographs to extract information from them. So based on that question, pause the video here, have a really good look in towards the background of the video, and see what you can come up with in terms of the answers to that question. Okay, so let's have a wee look here in the background. We clearly have some high density infrastructure here. So clearly, if this seawall is there to protect this coastal area from erosion, so there is definitely an economic asset there to be protected. But this feature here is a pier, which is something that you find in many of the old English tourism coastal areas. It would have been built in the 19th century as a place to attract the tourists to come in. So this is an indication here that this is an area that's important for tourism, and the tourism area needs to be protected here as well. So that's why it would have been built. Why is it being maintained? Well, in the first instance, it's been damaged, and there is a kind of health and safety thing there. If the tourists are walking along here, you can't have them falling down through there, can you? But it also shows the limitations of the hard engineering. Hard engineering will always be undermined and will require those ongoing maintenance costs. Now, if you have a look here and think just even very simply to yourself, there's the cost of the salaries of these people, the cost of the machinery, the cost of the materials, the cost of the time, all of that cost, is it worth it? Well, when you look at the economic benefits of it, in this case, it's deemed to be the case. This video is taking us back up to Portrush, and you can see here that it's a pretty well, it's not a stormy day, but there's good waves coming in. But can you see here that the seawall is undermined a bit? It's collapsed down a little bit, especially in there, compared to some of the other areas. This is because the seawall was damaged, and what you're looking at here is the footpath here that was built and renovated just a few years ago. Within about a year of it opening, that footpath collapsed down a little bit because of the damage to the seawall. The footpath had to be protected there, and what they basically had to do was to bring in a lot of machinery and people down onto the beach to fix underneath the seawall to make sure that it wasn't going to collapse and the whole of the prom wasn't going to collapse down on top of it as well. So you can see there again that whole notion of the need for this ongoing maintenance for these hard engineering strategies you put in. So when you're doing that cost-benefit analysis, you really need to be sure that the value of what you're saving is going to be worth those costs. Now, let's move on to another example here. We're going to go down to southwest England this time, to a place called Dawlish. It's a seaside town in southwest England. And you can see here some storm waves coming in from a storm in 2014. Now, this storm was a really major storm, brought massive big waves and a lot of energy into the coastal environment. And as a result, this is what happened. Now you can see the waves are coming right in and they have damaged this whole area, so there's coastal flooding happening here. Seems like very, very cheerful music for the coastal flooding. Now here's the train caught in this. I'm not entirely sure that was a great idea for that train driver to keep going down there. If you're a passenger in that train right now, I don't quite know how you're feeling. There's the waves, so you can imagine the energy being thrown against this coastal area, all of the damage being caused. And did it damage the railway line? Yes, it did. You're not just talking about coastal flooding here, you're actually talking about the actual railway line itself being damaged. So whenever you come and have a look, there's a lot of the material that's been thrown around, the damage that has been done by these massive waves. So as you can see from these photographs, it wasn't just the damage to some of those buildings and wooden huts and things like this. The actual railway line itself was damaged and undermined by this. And it's a good job that that train had moved away at that stage. You can see this whole area has collapsed because it was eroded from below, and the whole thing has just collapsed and eroded out. This is a much, much larger scale version of what we just looked at Portrush. Coming up even as far as some of the homes here, and you can see some poor kid is coming to play with his toy car and discovered it's nearly taken away into the sea at that point. Now, what you're looking at here is a video of the repairs that were being done, the initial repairs. Now, what was being done here, and more importantly, why? I mean, does there not come a point where you decide, oh, I really need to cut our losses here, because actually having a railway line right beside the sea like that, not really the smartest location to build it and put it, is it? Probably better just to ignore that one and maybe take the inland railway line or something like that. You know, we don't need to keep protecting this one by the sea. But clearly they have. You can see here that they're in the process of reconstructing the protection in the seawall in here, and they're trying to repair and enhance it again. Now the question is why? Now this map will help us to consider why. Now again, in your decision-making exercise as well as text and photographs, you'll get maps, and you'll be expected to extract some important information from this. So the question I want you to consider with this map, if you take a look at this, and I'll ask the question, then you can pause it and have a think about it. That map shows you the location of Dawlish. The red line there shows you the rail network in West England. The white lines are showing you, the red line is showing you the rail network in South West England. They're the main railways. The white lines are part of that too, I believe. So what I want you to do is to have a very careful look at the pattern of the railway lines and why it is that pattern is part of the reason why Dawlish still needs to be protected. Okay, let's see what your thinking was in this. This is Cornwall down here. Cornwall is tucked down right at the southwest corner of the British Isles, of England, I should say. It's a very popular tourist area. People love to flock there during the summer to go on holiday, partly because it's very, very beautiful, partly because it's very, very remote. Cornwall is actually a very, very remote rural area. It is a very long way to get from Cornwall back in towards London. In fact, I've seen some information somewhere that said if you got on a plane and flew from London to New York, you would arrive in New York faster than somebody who got a car and drove from London to Cornwall would get to Cornwall. And it's a very, very long way. It's very remote. And why that's significant is that there is a real need for a communications infrastructure network to allow people to be able to move in and out and reach this area. It's important for the economy down in Cornwall. And the only rail route in and out of Cornwall goes through, you guessed it, Dawlish. You don't have that railway, you make Cornwall even more remote than it was before. So what was the decision that was made with Dawlish? Despite the fact that clearly there was a major storm there, clearly this area is very vulnerable to damage, the decision was £30 million of work to secure the railway for 100 years. Now, they are thinking about that in the long term, of course. Of course, you'll discover as we go through the SMPs that this is very much keeping the long term in mind. But keeping the long term in mind by putting in some hard engineering. Now again, based on what you discovered at GCSE, that might seem odd to you. It's always the preference is for soft engineering. So why hard engineering? Well, if you have a look at a close-up of this artist's rendition of what it looked like, you can see really that you have no choice. There's the railway line right beside the sea. You saw those massive storm waves coming in, the height that they were reaching and coming over and damaging and undermining the whole thing. To protect that infrastructure, and then if you look at the infrastructure in behind, the significant town here with all of the buildings and so forth, this needs to be protected. And the only way you're going to protect these pieces of economic infrastructure and asset in this location, vulnerable as it is to storms, is a massive big seawall like this. £30 million, massive investment. Now you can see from this that they're showing that there'll be some ancillary benefits, that they've created this promenade on here. This will be good for recreation. It might also bring some tourists in as well. And you can see they've got a little photographer up here photographing the train. That's good that they're thinking of photographers. I think that's a good thing indeed. So what they're doing is creating this. This might bring in some extra tourism revenue and so forth into the town as well. But this major investment that they're putting there into the future. So this is some detail based on it. The initial repairs by 300 network rail engineers. 300 people. Now again, think of the cost in the labour of that one. 6,000 tonnes of concrete. And that was the initial repairs only. And then what we've just looked at is that long-term seawall of £30 million. That's a significant investment in money. So what are the economic assets that are being protected as a result of this investment? Well, we just looked at those. So is that considerable economic investment value for money? In this case, they decided yes. And there it is, you running this through the decision-making process in order to reach that decision. So that's your cost-benefit analysis, looking at the balance between costs and benefits. The second factor that they look at here in the Shoreline Management Plan is EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. You may have wondered where the environment has been in all of this. We've just looked at the economy here. So the environment is now where we turn. And again, in your decision-making exercise, that social, economic and environmental impacts are very, very core to the decisions that you'll be making. So let's have a look at these three. So it's the impacts on the natural environment here. So here's just one random example of something you can find at a coastal area. So it's a salt marsh. Do you remember where salt marshes form in behind? Do you remember from GCSE the feature and the landform that you had a salt marsh associated with? It's the spit, yeah. That's right. So in behind the spit, you'll get the salt marsh there. And the salt marsh is a very important and diverse habitat for plants and animals that live there. And it can be affected, directly affected depending on what you do. It can be indirectly affected. You can make another decision elsewhere, and an unintended consequence can have an impact on the salt marsh itself. So you need to take a look at the natural environment. That would be what you would have thought and assumed with that, I'm sure. But it also includes impacts on the built environment, and particularly heritage. And you'll see this in the decision-making exercise that we're going to be doing. I'm going to be getting you to look at some of the built heritage in the area, looking at these looking at these human features that are found in coastal areas. This is Castle Sween in Scotland. It's at risk from coastal erosion. In fact, you've got a whole bunch of historic sites in Scotland that are at risk from it, and they're at risk, as it says here, from climate change. Landmark Scottish castles and chapels are 28 historic sites, very high risk from climate change. Further, 160 properties are at high risk from flooding, coastal erosion and slope instability. More than 350 buildings owned by Historic Environment Scotland were assessed, and HES said that the climate change risk assessment, they're looking especially at how climate change will affect it, will help protect and preserve the site. So you need to bear that in mind as well. And as you have a look at this map, this is showing you the areas around about Great Britain that are particularly at risk from climate change, and the numbers of properties that are going to be potentially affected here. So if you have a look, here's Dawlish, this area down here in around about Cornwall and in towards Devon and Dawlish here, very much at risk. The south coast of England, and especially around about here in kind of East Anglia, Norfolk. North Norfolk here is where our case study is. This is where Haysborough is. It's very much at risk here, and we'll very much explore that and the impact that climate change can have because of the effect of rising sea levels. Now, whenever we're studying this topic in totality, we'll be looking at factors that affect sea level change, and what we'll discover at that stage is that the whole kind of southwest corner of Great Britain really is experiencing sea level rise at the moment. We'll have a look at the reasons for that. It's less of an impact towards the north and the west of Britain, but towards the south and the east, these areas are especially at risk. This, of course, includes some very high density areas and some major towns and major areas that need to be protected. So when you're looking at this, you need to look at the impact that climate change might have on all of this. So those are our factors, our cost-benefit analysis. You're looking at the balance between the benefits, the economic benefits from what you protect versus the costs, the immediate and long-term of protecting them. And then you're looking at your impacts on your environment and weighing those up. And whenever you weigh up all of those factors and you come towards your decision, you then have broad policy approaches that you can adopt to help you to put into action the decision you make. And we'll take a look at those in the next video.